So I have a quick question that some of you may fully understand what I'm asking here.
Consider subscribing.
As I've mentioned in my previous video, bought this phone, iPhone 15, for the United States. No text here, and up here all it's saying is that in order to use this phone, you need an eSIM. Also purchased this phone, also iPhone 15, but these are the different languages of the people that most likely would be using these phones in the various countries around the world. The United States is not one of them. English is here, but this phone was not meant to be used in the United States. Cool. Now, since this phone was made for the United States and is going to be used in the United States, there should be no issues. This phone is physically in the United States, as is this one, because that's where I physically am, but it was not made for the United States. First question is, are there going to be some network connectivity issues and compatibility issues? Maybe. That's not really what I'm too concerned about right now. My concern or my question is, if I put this phone in DFU mode, which is Device Firmware Upgrade Mode, I believe, which is one step beneath Restore Mode, and heck, even Restore Mode. When I inevitably do that and then have to make sure that my computer is connected to the internet, when it goes out and requests software and firmware, where is it coming from? My concerns or my guesses are that it's coming from one of two places. Either Apple's servers here in the United States, which in my opinion, if that's the case, would put the firmware on this phone that was made for this phone. But there's a possibility that it could say, hey, I now see all of those numbers. So whether it's the serial number, the IMEI, the EID, the other numbers that are there, it says, oh, well, I know that this phone is in the United States. I can tell that based off of this computer's IP address or the network it's attached to or whatever, but it should not be there. And I know where the appropriate firmware for this phone resides. So I'm going to leave the country, go consult those servers over there, get that firmware package, and pull it back to this device, regardless of where it physically is located itself. So before I purchased either one of these phones, really this one in particular, I was concerned that the lack of adequate band support would be a problem when accessing any of the big three carriers' networks, so AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile. And I said to myself, well, if I just flash the firmware onto the phone that's made for the United States, that would solve all the problems. But I don't know if that's how Apple operates. Do you get the firmware based off of where the phone is physically located? Do you get the firmware based off of the phone's model number or serial number or whatever? Or does it even really matter? Based off of what I've seen online in terms of different band support, the firmware is important, especially when you're trying to use phones that weren't necessarily made for your region. So I don't know if there's an answer. If you have an answer, that'd be greatly appreciated. If I put this phone in DFU mode in the United States, will it receive firmware for phones that were made in the United States? Will it receive firmware for phones that were made in these regions, so the appropriate original firmware? Or does it even really matter? And you might say to yourself, well, just give it a try. Which, yeah, could happen. But if I want to keep this firmware on here, if I flash it and I get this firmware, I guess if I use a VPN and then go through that process again, I'm just curious. What do you think actually happens in terms of firmware when flashing firmware from a different region?